You might think that UGC best practices are common sense. This is not common sense. There are 1,000 little details to keep track of, and 9 times out of 10, we find that a video creator misses something, and it just ends up looking scrappy in a bad way. Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to Growth Mentors, the podcast where we share snackable growth hacks, strategies, and best practices in how to drive maximum marketing impact and grow your bottom line. I'm your host, Matt LeBlanc, and today we're going to be talking about how to elevate your UGC, or user-generated content. So UGC is a really popular way for brands to fit in on native platforms like social media, but it also gets a really bad reputation for looking gritty, homemade, unpolished, very unbrand-like in a lot of cases. So what we're going to be sharing today are some setups, some settings, really best practices in how to get the most out of your smartphone devices in these scenarios, and also how to get the most out of your video creators. What instructions you can give people to really get polished UGC that you can be proud to run. So here to help me do this is the Director of Motion Graphics from Jump 450, Calvin Swaim. Calvin, let's jump right in. Say I'm a video creator. What should my settings look like on my smartphone before I start shooting?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two main things are you want to shoot it at 4K, essentially at the highest resolution that your phone will do, and then shoot it at 30 frames per second. This might also be 29.97, but essentially either 29.97 or 30 frames per second. That's what most social platforms use for their frame rate. And then beyond that, if you're specifically shooting on an iPhone, you want to turn off HDR and auto FPS. And what those two things are is HDR is high dynamic range, and it's a way to make the video look as good as possible, but it has some downstream consequences in the post-production side of things. And then auto FPS is auto frames per second, and that can introduce some issues with variable frame rates that doesn't really play well with the editing software. And then if you're shooting on an Android, you want to make sure that high efficiency video is turned off, because that will compress your video to try and save space on the file size. And we want as much color information and resolution information as possible.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Calvin, moving past the settings that we're actually going to be adjusting on our phones, let's talk a little bit about setup and background. Where do we want to place the camera? Where do we want to place ourselves? Background, movement, stable shots, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so generally speaking, for social, paid social ads, you want to be shooting vertically, because most of those placements are 9x16 or 4x5 or 1x1, some form of a vertical cut. Now, if you are running on YouTube, that is 16x9, and there's no great way to capture all of the aspect ratios in one shot. But if 16x9 is kind of your most important, shoot horizontally, but just definitely make sure that there's a lot of space between the camera and your subject, so you have the ability to cut in on the 9x16 within that 16x9 frame. Now, beyond aspect ratio, if we're talking backgrounds, we want to have something that's not too distracting, that, there's not clutter or anything behind you that might draw the eye away from the subject. Something that's too colorful, that is maybe a pile of books or clothes. Like, you want it to look as nice as possible.
Absolutely. And then just in terms of where we're placing the actual camera, right? We can either be putting this on some sort of tripod. If you or a creator that you're working with doesn't have a tripod, you can really easily stabilize your phone by putting it on a table with a pile of books, wedged in between a couple of hard, heavy items. I mean, get creative on this, but really keeping your phone stabilized in a lot of ways is really going to be sort of your safest way of shooting. It's also, you're not going to be creating any extra shake or movement. It's also really going to allow you to control the space around the subject within the frame, right? And there are a lot of reasons that we're so aware of this space that we create. If you're going to be putting text on the screen or headlines or, different, text bubbles or really any sort of graphics on the screen, you just want to be aware of those while you're shooting and sort of leave that space in the frame to play with that. And similarly, if you're ordering this video content from someone else, you need to make them really aware of those shots as well. And we've found that drawing a simple picture with a stick figure is sometimes the best way to sort of get these simple ideas across. So don't be afraid of breaking it down to basics to get what you want.
Yeah, and in addition to leaving space for graphics or text or things like that, leaving the shot a little bit wider allows for is punching in, so you can sort of get two shots out of it. You can have your wide shot, and then you can punch in and get a close-up or a medium close-up. And we want to leave the wide shot a little bit wide because if it's too close when you punch in, then that just creates too much of a close-up, and it might be very awkward to do it that way. So yeah, definitely keeping it wider is the safest bet.
Excellent. Just talking for a moment here about clothing and wardrobe. These are just some really sort of evergreen best practices in terms of what people should be wearing when on camera. You're going to be avoiding tight patterns, stripes, polka dots, things that might mess with the camera and create something confusing looking on you. Calvin, you want to break down some other standard things here?
Yeah, basically we want to avoid anything that's got text or a logo. That might be a copyright issue. Text, we don't want anything to distract the viewer. If they're looking at the text, reading it on your shirt, they're not listening to what you're saying. And then beyond that, I would just avoid extremes of color. You don't want white. Black might be okay depending on the background, but white generally doesn't work, or loud, garish, bright colors. We want the wardrobe to complement what's happening, not pull us away and distract us from the person who's speaking.
Right. And similarly, you want to be aware of the color of your background. You probably don't want to wear a shirt that is the same color as the wall behind you, unless you're doing something super intentional in that way. Now, a lot of people that are listening to this are maybe thinking that some of these things that we're talking about feel really basic or maybe even like common sense. The reason that we are talking through these is because there are so many of these small details to keep track of when shooting content like this. And as working with a team that uses a lot of content like this, these are things that are not common sense. These are things that are screwed up very, very commonly. So that is the purpose for talking through this. But if you're not so experienced in shooting this kind of content, take some notes, write up a draft for yourself of best practices for shooting UGC the next time you're hiring a creator. Calvin, take us into lighting here. For people, something we hear so commonly is, I don't have a ring light, I don't have a studio light.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people are in apartments where the lighting that you do have access to, just the natural apartment lighting, isn't really bright enough, or it's not nice enough. So we all have access to one of the largest and brightest lighting sources, and that's the sun. So essentially, if you don't have a bright apartment, I would film directly in front of as large a window as you have, especially on a sunny or overcast day, because you're going to get a lot of light from that, and it's probably going to be much brighter than any kind of apartment light that you have going on.
Right. You're just putting some light on your face. If you really kind of want to get into the weeds on this point, you can offset the window so that it's at a 25 to 45 degree angle to create some sort of softer shadows on your face while you're shooting. But I would say, broadly speaking, when shooting this kind of content, stay out of the nuance even, and you're just looking for some nice, even light to put on someone's face.
Yeah, exactly. And that feeds nicely into sort of the next idea is if you're shooting outside, so you will be using the sun in that situation. Outside, the biggest things to think about there and to be worrying about is, especially on a bright sunny day, a cloudless day, you're going to get very harsh shadows. I would be very aware of maybe under the eyelids, the shadow that your nose is throwing. If the light is coming too much to the side and you have one side of your face that's very beautifully lit and the other side that's very dark, you kind of want to avoid that. And it's actually kind of against what might be common sense if you were to think about this, but shooting on an overcast day is the best option you have, because with cloud cover, that's going to really soften the light. It's going to create really nice, natural looking shadows, and that can actually work out the best for you.
Exactly. So we're really kind of avoiding extremes when shooting outside. You don't want direct sunlight on your face that's going to blow you out, and you don't want the really harsh shadows, like Calvin says, on eyelids or any portion of your face. So overcast days are really, really the best thing that you can do. Calvin, talk to me about filming, leaving some space on the takes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. The two things that I would actually say there is, one, you want to have a head and a tail to every take that you shoot. And what that means is when you hit record, give 3 to 4 seconds of a neutral expression, a neutral body posture before you launch into the lines you're supposed to do. Especially if something that we see often that is problematic is they're reading the line, they get the line, and then they start saying it before they're even flush to the camera. And that just creates kind of an awkward moment. Same thing at the end of a take. What you see often is people finish the last line, and before they're even done with it, they're reaching to turn off the record on their phone. So you have this kind of awkward movement at the end of the take that makes it really hard to use. So at the beginning, give yourself 3 to 4 seconds. At the end, give yourself 3 to 4 seconds. And that way you won't lose any potentially good takes because of an awkward movement that's sort of unexplained at the beginning or end. And then beyond that, watch everything that you record before you send it off to your editor, to the client, to whoever. Just make sure that everything came out okay, that there's no audio issues that you didn't realize were happening, or that maybe the video got blown out and isn't looking as nice as it should. Just a quick watch through can identify issues that might have happened that you didn't realize. And then if you do that before you kind of move on, then everything's still set up. You can kind of go back and re-record whatever you need to. But don't assume that everything goes perfectly, because it doesn't always go that way.
Absolutely. In fact, it oftentimes does not go that way. So really good shout out there. Moving on to audio. So a couple best practices in terms of shooting audio. I would just call out airplane mode from the very beginning. If you're going to shoot something, put your phone on airplane mode. Don't risk getting calls coming in, messages, pop-ups, notifications, interrupting your takes. It's just going to make you frustrated later on. Calvin, any other kind of audio best practices that we can talk through here?
Yeah, well, I would say, especially if you have anybody else who's on the video shoot with you, it doubly so for them to put it in airplane mode, and even better, turn their phones off. Anything that's going to make noise and ruin a take. And then just be cognizant of the sounds that might be natural in the area that you're shooting. Our brains do a really good job of canceling out distracting noise or background noise so that we can ignore it and not even notice it. But if you consciously try and hear, you realize that a lot of places are really noisy. So you want to be in the quietest place possible. Computers make noise that you might not be aware of. Appliances make noise that you might not be aware of. Obviously turn your AC off when you're filming. And then the last thing I'll say about audio is the biggest thing is to avoid shooting in rooms where you have sort of the walls have nothing on them. They're just like the floor is just hardwood floors. Anything that's a hard surface, especially that's unbroken by other things like paintings or furniture, is going to be very echoey, and that can kind of ruin your audio when you're recording it. So try to avoid sort of the bare room or the room that has a lot of bare walls. But if you can't avoid that, one thing that you can do that can sort of help alleviate that issue a little bit is if you take some blankets or comforters and sort of bunch them up at your feet and then underneath where the camera is recording the audio, that can go a long way to sort of break up sound waves so that they don't echo off of all of the surfaces. Essentially, audio waves are looking for flat surfaces so that they can bounce off them, and that's what creates the echo. So as much as you can do to sort of break that up, the better your audio is going to end up.
Great. So we have shared a bunch of best practices today in terms of phone settings, camera setups and backgrounds, lighting, filming, audio. There are so many different approaches that you can take to creating UGC content. And really the best way we have found is finding UGC content out there on the internet to use as sort of a reverse engineer, right? You can find different trending concepts and things that will work really well for your brand. And you can really sort of break those into a structure or mimic the format and create it for yourself. But I just wanted to shout out a couple of brands that I think are doing UGC really well. There are very many of them. This is just a small handful. But for various reasons, I would call out Hims, the telehealth company for prescription and over-the-counter drugs. Hims does a lot of UGC style creative in their paid advertising. I think that they really lean into a lot of native style text treatments. They keep it really simple. I think one thing that they do really well is essentially product shots. And what another company might do as a static product shot, Hims makes it a UGC video. Not only is a hand holding the product, but they build like a really basic scenario around the product in that video, so that you're getting a little bit of the pain point of the person that might be using this product. So they're doing a great job, in my opinion. You can check them out on Facebook Ad Library. Calvin, did you have any similar recommendations that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I would definitely take a look at Social Savannah. Like if you are a brand, or if you're working with brands that are elevated, have a high level of polish, where a strongly defined brand guidelines and not a lot of wiggle room to step outside of that, I think she's doing sort of elevated, polished UGC that gives you the kind of handmade, user-generated, real users authenticity of UGC, but also allows for the higher elevation of the creative. So you can kind of get a little bit of the best of both worlds by doing some of the things that she's doing.
Excellent. Calvin, thank you so much. A lot of great, actionable information for us to take in today. If you are listening and you are interested in exploding your own digital growth, you can get in touch with Jump 450 in the link below in the description. That is www.jump450.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more weekly episodes. We'll see you next time.